I've been playing the new Forza Motorsport preview these past couple weeks, and in the wake of our developer interview with Turn 10, I wanted to share my own impressions on the game as well. After all, Forza 2023 has been in development longer than any prior entry in the Motorsport series, so expectations are high. The preview build includes a limited selection of content, but it's enough to give us a better idea of how it's shaping up. So let's start right at the beginning. You have access to 3 cars and 5 tracks in this build. The game kicks off with an introduction segment in the spirit of Forza Horizon, where you're dropped right in the middle of a race in progress across 2 different tracks and asked to drive. It's nowhere near as seamless as Forza Horizon, mind you, as there is a distinct loading point between the 2 events, but it's still a great way to kick things off, and it really showcases what the engine is capable of. All the new lighting, reflections, and post-processing shine through. The very first race in this demo then takes place on series staple Maple Valley, and it's perhaps the best looking track we've seen thus far. The new dynamic lighting system combined with 3D foliage makes a world of difference, creating a sleek, gorgeous track environment to race through. If you compare this against Forza Motorsport 7, the difference becomes even more evident. Forza 7's lighting is entirely baked, and while it can look amazing in certain areas, the limitations are clearly visible on this track. The Corvette sticks out and is not well integrated into the environment's lighting model, versus the new installment where everything feels more grounded and seamless. The trackside detail has received a major boost with the aforementioned 3D vegetation, as well as detailed rock formations versus the flat billboard trees used in Forza 7. Combine that with the enhanced motion blur, fog effects, sun glare, and car paint simulation, and it feels like a significant upgrade. But during the preview phase, there have been critiques leveled at these visuals, largely as a result of its dynamic time of day feature. Certain track conditions appear somewhat washed out, which is extremely evident when racing around Mugello. When compared to Forza 7, there's no doubt that the new lighting model produces more natural results, but many have noted that it feels less impactful and lacking in contrast. So what's up with this? Well, for starters, it's not an HDR issue. All this footage was captured in SDR using the default settings. I can say that much. But I do believe they've specifically aimed for this hazy midday appearance. Basically, it's clearly an artistic decision. Right or wrong, that's the look they're going for, but it does vary per track based on the time of day and weather conditions, so keep that in mind. This is something we'll put to test in the final game. Now, in terms of actual trackside detail, there's definitely some improvement here as well. The world geometry is expanded with more objects around the scenery, trees are now fully 3D again, and lighting is enhanced. The new game also boasts 3D crowds like Gran Turismo 7, versus those flat billboards used in Forza 7, which appear completely static while racing. Just observing the side of the track here, you can see that Turn 10 did actually go back and redo everything here. Yeah, some aspects look familiar, but things have moved around, changed, received new textures, new foliage, and more. It's not just that same track from Forza 7 dropped into the new game. Like here, check out all the additional light poles and other trackside objects that have been added in the new game. Unfortunately, this also means there are some weird inconsistencies, like here where the textures are clearly higher resolution in Forza 7. There's also the edge of the blacktop visible in 7, but not in the new game. Now, of course, this is just the preview build, but it's already 130 gigabytes, so I don't think it's a case where they used lower resolution textures to save on space. Again, we'll have more to say about this in the final game, but it is interesting to compare even at this point. I also noticed some strange visual bugs in this build. In one instance, the crowd appeared to be at what seems like the lowest possible LOD level, depicted as these triangular figures that frankly look hilarious. Switching to photo mode, they would actually draw correctly, but once you're back to gameplay or replay, they were triangular again. Strange. I also saw some complaints regarding the wheel spinning animations used when cars take off from the starting line. It can look a bit awkward, but the real problem is that in many cases the textures used to draw these wheels appeared low resolution. I assume this is a glitch in the preview version. I also noticed situations in which tree LODs were messed up like this and appeared blurry and low resolution. So you might be thinking, John, why the heck are you pointing out these things in a preview version? The final game's not even out. Well, that's because it's the perfect opportunity to flag these issues before they appear in the final game. Hopefully that makes sense. Thankfully, most other aspects of the visuals are shaping up great. The addition of 3D foliage in particular is a huge deal for this game, as they properly cast and receive shadows, lending the game a much greater sense of depth. They even factored in light transmission through the leaves themselves. As they said in the interview, they're designed to read at speed, and they definitely accomplish this. The 3D crowds also hold up rather well when scrutinized, certainly the best crowd system Turn 10 has developed to date. Then there's things like on the night tracks, where headlights do indeed still cast shadows, kind of as expected, but I really like the transfer of the paint color to the road surface. The blue finish of this STI is clearly visible across the tarmac. There's so many extra touches to the lighting that help it appear much more realistic than any prior game in the series. They also massively boosted the quality of the game's motion blur. Not only does it enhance the sense of speed, but it improves the actual visuals as well, with far less visible noise. Plus, for the first time, you can even adjust your FOV, which combined with the extra motion blur allows the game to feel way faster than you'd expect. This is just scratching the surface though, and I want to talk about more of this stuff in the actual review video, but there's a lot to love here so far. But okay, I want to talk about the various modes and how it works in practice on Xbox. In our interview, Turn 10 shared the basics of these modes, but didn't touch on the actual end result. To reiterate, on Xbox Series X, there's 3 modes: Performance, Performance with Ray Tracing, and the Visuals mode, which is sort of a quality mode. Performance mode is 60 frames per second without ray tracing features enabled. It relies on dynamic resolution scaling, but in most of our pixel counts, the result was at or near native 4K. In worst case scenario, resolution can drop to 1440p, but that is the absolute minimum for performance mode. However, they've made the switch to TAA over MSAA, so this time image quality is significantly different. Now, on the positive side, in-surface aliasing is cleaned up significantly, and it does produce a more temporally stable image, but at the same time, it lacks the pristine appearance of MSAA and exhibits its own drawbacks. Look closely and you'll notice plenty of ghosting on objects sticking out into the scene, and things like fences don't necessarily play nice with the TAA. So in this preview build, I would say that image quality is somewhat blurrier than we've seen in the series past, but while racing, it produces a more stable image that's still pretty clean. We'll test this again when we have the final game. But what about the ray tracing performance mode? Well, firstly, when enabled, you gain 2 additional features: ray traced reflections, but only on mirror-like surfaces, and ray traced ambient occlusion. I can't stress enough how impressive it is to see 2 different ray tracing effects enabled simultaneously at 60 FPS on a console. Yeah, it has its limitations, which we'll discuss in a moment, but the result is still highly impressive. RTAO primarily benefits occluded areas in a scene which receive less light, like small crevices between body panels and all the areas around a track that receive less direct lighting. Typically, games have relied on screen space solutions, but these have many drawbacks. You could also bake it out, but then it's not dynamic. RTAO provides the best of both worlds, with more accurate and cleaner overall results. Dynamic reflections then are more obvious. Cars feature both self-reflections and also the reflection of other cars around them while racing. It's a nice feature, especially when racing in third person. Watch closely as this red Nissan approaches from the left. Pay attention to his body panels and you'll see the blue STI that I'm driving reflected across its surface. Of course, this comes at a cost. It's expensive, and that cost comes in the form of resolution. It does support dynamic resolution scaling up to 4K, but in reality it averages around 1440p during actual gameplay, but in heavy scenes like these cinematics it can drop as low as 1080p as a worst case scenario, but during gameplay it's largely just 1440p. Combined with TAA, the image quality does take a small hit, but it's still reasonably sharp, all things considered, and impressively, the game locks to 60 frames per second without issue across every track in this preview version. The visual mode then seems to hit native 4K much like the regular performance mode, but features additional ray tracing features. Specifically, The non-car mirror surfaces also receive RT reflections, things like glass on buildings. In Performance RT mode, these reflections only apply to the cars. Of course, this comes at an even steeper cost as the frame rate now is dropped to 30 frames per second. So how did they achieve this then? The key is that they found the right balance between performance and visual fidelity. They're basically using hybrid reflections in the game. Dynamic objects like the cars or scenery very near the player car do reflect using ray tracing, but most of the scenery around you seems to be handled via cubic environment map textures sampled every other frame. So this leads to two caveats. Firstly, the cube maps only update at 30 FPS, while RT reflections appear to be updated every frame. This leads to a slight mismatch between the two. The other more significant limitation ties into the name, mirror reflections. This is key to optimization, as performing ray tracing operations across rough surfaces is more computationally expensive. Their solution is also lacking specular occlusion, meaning that reflective surfaces appear too bright in shadowed regions. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the GT7 versus Forza stuff just yet, but I will briefly note that GT7's ray trace reflections used in replays, not gameplay, do simulate reflection on rough materials like this, making them far more expensive to render. They also reflect more of the scenery, but there's no way they would have been able to pull this off in-game at 60 FPS. So Turn 10 basically found a clever middle ground that provides the benefits of ray tracing while still remaining viable on a console at 60 FPS. But there's a wrinkle in all this. We've established that the quality of the ray traced reflections are restrained for performance reasons, even at 30 FPS in replays, but the engine actually seems capable of more. When you look back at their earlier preview videos, for instance, you might notice that the quality of the RT reflections are much higher than what we see in replays or while playing. So, did it change? Well, it turns out this level of quality is actually feasible in the engine. This opening sequence set in Maple Valley shows super high quality reflections in real time. We even get rough reflections in the cockpit view, and it looks absurdly good. It looks good enough that I initially thought it might be a video, but the sequence prior to this is actually a video with very noticeable compression artifacts, so I think this is fully real time. But it makes me wonder, might this have been feasible during the 30 FPS replays? Will we see this level of quality in the PC version on track? These are all questions that are still up in the air. But don't get me wrong, what we did get in racing is still very impressive. While there are compromises, offering RT reflections and RTAO simultaneously in a console game at 60 frames per second is a remarkable feat of engineering. But it would have been awesome to see this level of quality in the 30 FPS replays or the visuals mode. Of course, there's also the Series S, and this one's a little different. It basically has two modes, performance and visuals, but neither offer ray tracing in gameplay or during replays. Series S does have ray tracing within the garage and certain other circumstances, but that's it. Performance mode aims for 1080p, while visuals mode targets 1440. DRS is used in both cases. The gap between Series S and X in this game, though, feels larger than usual, and I was surprised that the performance mode maxes out at just 1080p. And unfortunately, the TAA is not well suited to this resolution, and the game winds up looking pretty blurry in motion, and worse than prior entries that targeted 1080p with MSAA. Again though, we'll retest all of this on launch and see how it shapes up, but at the moment, these are the results. Unfortunately, I didn't get much footage of the Series S version running, since the servers closed while I was trying to capture, and the game cannot be played offline currently. That said, I did have some fun testing the crash physics here on Series S, running my Civic at full speed into oncoming traffic. I was pleased to see that it is indeed possible to flip the cars. So that's Forza Motorsport thus far. There's a lot of potential here, and we'll be here to cover it all. Obviously, while we've discussed the visuals here today, we didn't get into the racing side of things yet, which is what Forza is all about. I do want to discuss that aspect in the review as well. First impressions are positive, but how will it play over time? We'll find out. Thus far, it looks great, it plays great, and it runs very smoothly. I do have other critiques, of course, such as the car models, which are perhaps less detailed than I might have expected in many cases, but at the same time, things like the paint simulation are a huge step up, which does help the situation. I also remained a little bit disappointed that we aren't getting a proper soundtrack while racing. I know that's not necessarily the focus for a sim racing game and not everybody would use it, but for me, music is key to any great racing game. That's why you've been hearing Ridge Racer tracks in the background of this video. But we're just getting started with Forza coverage. We'll have the full review in October, and sometime in November, we'll revisit Gran Turismo versus Forza, which is sure to be a good time. We'll see you then.